I've been reading the Bible, reading about Peter. Peter was a man who lived during the New Testament time of the Bible. Peter was a fisherman, and Peter was a disciple. Peter met Jesus when Peter and his brother Andrew were fishermen. They fished on the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is a big lake in Israel. That's where they lived, and that's where they fished. Peter and his brother Andrew fished with nets. They didn't fish with fishing poles. They would hold onto a big net and they would cast it into the water. It was called cast net fishing. That means they kind of threw it into the water. And then they would wait. What were they waiting for? Well, they were waiting for fish to swim into the net. There were some weights on the net and it kind of held it together, and so when the fish came in, they hoped that the fish would get stuck in there because they wanted to keep those fish. Sometimes something went wrong with the net or the weights, or something wasn't working right. So one of the fishermen would dive into the water and go down and fix that net. I think that fisherman was Peter. Peter seemed to like to go into the water. So sometimes they did this at night. Sometimes after they'd been fishing at night, they caught lots of fish. So I guess their faces, show me what their faces probably looked like when they caught lots of fish. Like, yeah, happy. Show me what they did with their hands, maybe like, yeah. So sometimes they caught a few fish. So what were they doing? Maybe like, okay. But they weren't singing, we got lots of fish. They were probably just singing, we got a few fish, we'll have to do with that. Sometimes they caught no fish. Oh, and how do you think they felt about that? Oh, they caught no fish. No dancing, no singing, just back with no fish. Well, when they did have fish, they would take that catch of fish back to the shore. One day, they were doing that kind of thing, fishing and bringing the net back, fixing the net, doing things like that. Jesus came, and he called to Peter and Andrew, "Follow me, I will make you fishers of men." Well, that is the day that Peter and Andrew stopped being fishers of fish and started being fishers of men. I think they probably didn't even know what that meant, to be a fisher of men. But I think that they so much recognized that Jesus was really a special person. I think they just wanted to follow him. So they did. And they did follow Jesus for 3.5 years. They were called disciples of Jesus. Jesus taught them how to be fishers of men. They walked all around Israel and watched Jesus as he explained to people who he was and invited people to believe him so that those people could stop the lives that they had and start a new kind of life. Peter loved Jesus. And really, he was one of Jesus's closest friends. Peter had lots of adventures in those 3.5 years as a disciple. Adventures like watching Jesus do miracles and even taking part in miracles. Peter was the only disciple who walked on top of the water. That was a miracle. Oh, but also, Peter sank down into the water when he started to look at the water and not to look at Jesus, when he forgot that Jesus was able to keep Peter safe. Peter loved Jesus so much. He wanted to always be a good, faithful friend of Jesus. But when the Roman soldiers came to arrest Jesus to take him away, Peter and all the other disciples ran away. They were too afraid. The soldiers, remember, they took Jesus to a Roman ruler to have him punished. The Israelite leaders, the religious leaders, were yelling to the Roman leaders, "Crucify him. He says he's the Son of God. He needs to die." Well, the Roman leader, didn't really think that Jesus had done anything wrong, but after a while he said, "Okay," and he told the soldiers, "Take this man away and crucify him." The soldiers took him away to crucify him. While Jesus was in front of the Roman rulers before they took him away, he was having the trial. Peter was watching, but not too close. He kind of hung back. He was by himself. He wanted to know what was happening, but he was afraid. A servant girl said to Peter, "Oh, I think you are one of the men who was with that man, Jesus." And Peter said, "Who, me?" "Yes, you." "Couldn't be." Oh dear. And he ran away to a different place, and then he was looking from a different place over there. And a second person said, "Hey, you are one of the men who was with that man, Jesus." "Who, me?" "Yes, you." "Couldn't be." And Peter ran to another part, and he was looking, and oh dear, a third person said to Peter, "You are one of the men who was with this man, Jesus." "Who, me?" "Yes, you." "Couldn't be." Oh. Peter had said no, that he didn't know Jesus. He had said it 3 times, and he was so ashamed, and he was still afraid, and he ran away again. The soldiers took Jesus to a place called Golgotha. They nailed Jesus to a cross, putting nails in his hands and in his feet. They crucified him there and put his body in the tomb. But 3 days later, Jesus rose from being dead to being alive again. Alive forever. Jesus started visiting people who had been afraid and sad and confused and ashamed. He talked with them and he helped them to understand that he really was alive. Jesus spent 40 days visiting people and showing them that he was alive again. Peter got to see Jesus actually several times. The first time was just privately. Jesus came and talked to Peter. But then after that, Peter's with other people when Jesus would come and talk to them. One of the times that Peter saw Jesus was kind of like the time Jesus went to the fishing boat and invited Peter and Andrew to follow him to be fishers of men. This is how it happened. Peter told his friends, some of the other disciples, "I'm going fishing." And they said, "Okay, we'll go with you." So 7 of them went to the Sea of Galilee and they sailed out on the boat to fish. They threw their nets, cast their nets into the water like I told you they did. They fished all night, but it was a no-fish night, no fish. So they pulled their net back in and they started sailing back to shore, and there was a man over there on the shore and he yelled out, "Did you catch any fish?" They said, "No." It was a little too far. They couldn't actually see that it was Jesus, but John, one of the disciples, was looking and he said, "Oh, it's the Lord." The reason he said that is because the man who was Jesus yelled, "Cast your nets on the other side." They said, "Okay." So they cast their net on the other side of the boat from where they had been fishing, and the fish started to come in right away. Lots, until that net was full. So that's when John said, "Oh, it's the Lord." Peter, that man who liked that water, he just jumped right into the water and he swam to shore. He was so excited. the rest of the men brought their boats in. When they got there, Jesus had been cooking breakfast for them, fish and bread. They all sat down and ate that breakfast. Jesus was still telling them, showing them, that he could do everything that they needed. He could take care of them. Peter ate that good breakfast, but Peter still needed another thing from Jesus. Peter was embarrassed and ashamed of himself for running away from the soldiers when Jesus was arrested, and for saying that he didn't know Jesus at all. He kept thinking about that he had said no, that he didn't know Jesus 3 times. Jesus knew what Peter needed, and Jesus did what Peter needed. Jesus asked Peter, actually 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" So Peter got the chance to answer, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me?" Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Then Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." Then the 3rd time, Jesus asked Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Lord, you know all things. You know I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Oh, feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. Remember at the beginning of the 3.5 years when Jesus had invited Peter to follow him and be a fisher of men? Was Peter really fishing for men, like catching them in a net while the men were swimming around in the water? No. Peter was learning how to tell people about Jesus, how to show people a different way of living, how to invite them to come away from that old life to the new life, living for God, living for things that would last forever. When people heard the good news about Jesus, they could believe and have a new kind of life, a life forever with Jesus. Now, Jesus had finished the work that God had sent him to earth to do. He had taught the disciples. He had told people all over Israel about who he was. And he had died on the cross to be punished for the sins of everyone. Now Jesus was going back up into heaven, and a new adventure was going to start for Peter and the other disciples. They were going to be telling people the gospel. Sometimes the Israelite people are called the Jewish people, or the Jews. Sometimes Jesus calls them his sheep. He said the Israelite people, the Jews, needed him, Jesus, to be their shepherd, to teach them, and to take care of them. He was telling Peter now that Peter's special job was to teach and take care of the Israelite people, the Jews, Jesus' sheep. All of those adventures that Peter experienced with Jesus over those 3.5 years, even the adventures that were hard and scary and made him ashamed of himself, all of those were part of God's plan to make Peter ready to be in charge of other believers when Jesus has gone away from them into heaven. Jesus loved Peter enough to let him have all those hard experiences that made him ready for the job, for the adventure that was coming. Peter didn't know what would happen next, but he would find out. And we will too when we read more about Peter doing his job, caring and feeding the sheep. Do you think it will turn out to be even more of an adventure than it was for fishing for men? Well, we'll see.